Sibley was fatally stabbed in an apparent hate crime while dancing outside of a Brooklyn gas station.
Fox 5's Kendall Green joins us live from downtown Brooklyn with the details on what comes next in this case. Kendall.
Hey, good evening, Steve and Natasha. All eyes across the country have been on the stabbing death of 28-year-old O'Shae Sibley, and a grand jury just returned an indictment for murder charges for that suspect. Now, the DA, Eric Gonzalez, filed the indictment against the 17-year-old high school student today for second-degree murder as a hate crime in the death of Sibley. They decided to try this case as a hate crime alongside the Homicide and Hate Crime Bureau because Sibley and his friends were allegedly targeted for being themselves. Now, back on July 29th, the 17-year-old stabbed the 28-year-old Philly native to death while filling up at a gas station in the Longwood section of Brooklyn. This garnered national attention with celebrities like Beyonce sharing his name with her worldwide audience. He was laid to rest Tuesday while vigils honored the well-known dancer's life and
The summer night air hung heavy over Brooklyn as O'Shae Sibley and his friends pulled into the mobile gas station in Midwood. Music poured from their car, Beyonce's Renaissance album, a celebration of black queer culture. For O'Shae, a 28-year-old professional dancer from Philadelphia, this was more than just a quick stop for fuel after a friend's birthday celebration. It became his stage. His body moved with fluid grace, arms extending in sharp, precise angles, then softening into waves. Voguing, the dance style born from Harlem's ballroom scene, was O'Shae's language. Each movement spoke volumes about his identity, his joy, his freedom. His friends laughed, recorded videos, joined in. The forecourt of a gas station transformed into a moment of pure, uninhibited expression. 10 minutes later, O'Shae Sibley lay bleeding on the concrete, stabbed through the heart. How does a moment of celebration become a death sentence in mere minutes? What turns dancing at a gas station into a homicide scene? The answer lies at the intersection of hatred, identity, and the courage to exist authentically in public spaces. That night, July 29, 2023, began with laughter and ended with sirens. The security cameras captured it all. The dancing, the approach of a group of teenagers, the heated words, the momentary calm, and then the fatal confrontation. In the space between those moments lies a story about America itself, about who gets to express joy freely and who pays the ultimate price for it. O'Shae didn't die because he was in the wrong place. He didn't die because he made poor choices. He died because he dared to be visibly, joyfully himself. A black gay man dancing to music he loved, refusing to shrink himself when confronted with hatred. They said they didn't want gay people in their neighborhood. A witness would later report. They were saying it's not appropriate. But what determines what's appropriate in public spaces? Who decides which expressions of identity are acceptable and which deserve punishment? These questions echo beyond this single tragedy, reverberating through communities across the nation. Have you ever witnessed how quickly joy can turn a tragedy? Have you seen how a single moment of hatred can extinguish a life filled with promise? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This is the story of O'Shae Sibley, dancer, friend, son, brother, whose final dance became both his expression of freedom and the catalyst for his death. It's a story about the price of visibility, the power of art, and the ongoing struggle for the right to exist without fear. Welcome to the Dark Trace Crime Stories. Whether you're returning or joining us for the first time, we're glad you're here. If you find value in stories that shine a light on justice and the lives behind the headlines, please consider supporting the channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with others. North Philadelphia in the early 1990s was where O'Shae Sibley's story began. Born into a large family as one of 9 siblings, O'Shae's childhood was filled with the natural chaos and camaraderie that comes with growing up in such a household. The crowded streets of North Philly shaped him, but it was within his own home that he first encountered both love and the challenge of standing out. From his earliest years, O'Shae moved differently. While other boys in his neighborhood gravitated toward sports, he found himself drawn to rhythm and movement. This difference didn't go unnoticed. Schoolmates teased him relentlessly for his love of dance, turning what should have been carefree childhood moments into exercises in resilience. Each taunt about the way he moved or expressed himself became another weight he carried. But what his peers used as ammunition against him would ultimately become his salvation. At age 13, a pivotal moment arrived that would alter the trajectory of O'Shae's life. Karen Pendergrass, a teacher at the Philadelphia School of Dance Arts, noticed a shy teenager repeatedly peeking into her classroom, drawn to the movements happening inside but hesitant to enter. When she finally invited him in, something awakened in the young man. That classroom became the first place where what made him different wasn't a liability. It was a gift. Soon after, O'Shae joined the Philadelphia Dance Company, known locally as Philadanco, a prestigious institution that has launched countless professional dance careers. For a boy who had been mocked for the very thing he loved most, walking through those doors meant entering a world where his natural inclinations were not just accepted but celebrated. He flourished from that moment, Pendergrass would later recall after his death. The transformation wasn't immediate, but unfolded gradually, as O'Shae discovered that the very movements that had made him a target on Philadelphia streets made him exceptional within the studio walls. Dance became more than just an activity for O'Shae. It evolved into a language through which he could communicate his most authentic self. The discipline required in professional dance training gave structure to his natural talents. Hours spent perfecting movements, understanding his body's capabilities, and expressing emotion through physical form built not just technical skill, but something far more valuable: confidence. This newfound confidence extended beyond the dance floor. As O'Shae mastered his craft, he began to embrace all aspects of his identity. The boy who had once been teased for being different grew into a young man who was proudly, openly gay. Dance had given him the tools to transform vulnerability into strength, difference into distinction. His talent didn't go unrecognized. O'Shae earned a scholarship at Philadanco, validating his dedication and natural abilities. The company became his second family, a community where he belonged without condition or compromise. Fellow dancers and instructors recognized not just his technical abilities, but the rare quality of emotional authenticity he brought to every performance. The journey from a shy boy peeking into a dance studio to a confident performer represented more than artistic development. It was personal evolution. Dance hadn't just given O'Shae a potential career. It had given him a framework for understanding himself and his place in the world. In those formative years in Philadelphia, through the combination of natural talent, dedicated training, and the embrace of a supportive community, O'Shae Sibley became not just a dancer, but a person who understood the power of authentic self-expression, a power that would define both his life and, tragically, the circumstances of his death. The bright lights of New York City beckoned O'Shae Sibley away from his Philadelphia roots. Like countless dancers before him, he made the pilgrimage to the city that represents the pinnacle of artistic opportunity in America. For O'Shae, New York wasn't just a place to advance his career. It was where he could fully inhabit all dimensions of his identity. New York's dance scene embraced him. His technical foundation from Philadanco opened doors, but it was his distinctive energy and emotional authenticity that made him stand out. Instructors and fellow dancers at the prestigious Ailey organization, where O'Shae participated in programs, consistently noted his exceptional presence. In studio spaces across the city, he became known for bringing an infectious enthusiasm that elevated everyone around him. His energy was incredible, recalled one instructor. When O'Shae entered a room, you felt it immediately. This wasn't just charisma. It was the confidence of someone who had found his purpose and place in the world. While continuing his formal dance training, O'Shae discovered New York's ballroom scene, an underground LGBTQ plus subculture with deep roots in Black and Latinx communities. Ballroom wasn't just dancing. It was a cultural movement born from necessity, created by those who had been excluded from mainstream spaces. In ballroom houses, marginalized youth found family, protection, and celebration of their identities. Voguing, the angular, precise dance style that emerged from this community, spoke directly to O'Shae's artistic sensibilities and personal journey. The dance form, named after the fashion magazine poses it emulated, was both technically demanding and deeply expressive. For a dancer who had spent his life translating emotion into movement, voguing offered a powerful new vocabulary. As O'Shae immersed himself in this world, he built connections that transcended typical friendships. In New York, he cultivated what many LGBTQ+ individuals refer to as chosen family, bonds formed not through blood but through shared experience, mutual protection, and unconditional acceptance. Among these relationships, his 15-year friendship with Otis Pena stood out. He was the salt to my pepper, the peanut butter to my jelly, Pena would later say, capturing the essential complementary nature of their bond. These weren't casual connections, but lifelines in a world that often remained hostile to Black gay men. O'Shae's apartment became a gathering place where friends could be their authentic selves without fear of judgment. His chosen family celebrated holidays together, supported each other through hardships, and shared in each other's triumphs. They attended performances, went dancing, and created the kind of safety net that many LGBTQ+ individuals must intentionally construct. What distinguished O'Shae within these circles was his willingness to stand up for himself and others. Friends described him as someone who refused to shrink himself or allow others to be diminished. This quality made him both beloved and a natural protector within his community. By his late 20s, O'Shae had built a life rich with purpose and connection. His days were filled with rehearsals, performances, and teaching. His evenings and weekends were devoted to the friends who had become family. Dance wasn't just his profession. It had become the foundation upon which he had constructed an authentic life, one movement at a time. In a city of millions, O'Shae Sibley had found his people, his purpose, and his voice. He had transformed from a boy teased in Philadelphia to a man celebrated in New York, all through the power of movement and the courage to be unapologetically himself. July 29, 2023, began as a celebration. O'Shae Sibley and his friends had gathered to mark a friend's birthday, an occasion for joy, connection, and the kind of carefree revelry that punctuates the routine of daily life. The summer evening in Brooklyn was warm, the mood light as they moved through the night, music playing, laughter flowing between them. The group had spent hours together, dining, sharing stories, and enjoying each other's company. O'Shae was in particularly high spirits that night. Friends would later recall his infectious energy, how he kept the mood elevated with his humor and spontaneous dance moves throughout the evening. This was O'Shae in his element, surrounded by people he loved, expressing himself freely. As the night progressed, the group found themselves needing to refuel their vehicle. What should have been a mundane pit stop became the stage for tragedy. At approximately 11 p.m., they pulled into the mobile gas station on Coney Island Avenue in Midwood, Brooklyn, a well-lit, ordinary corner of the city that would soon become the site of extraordinary violence. While one friend pumped gas, O'Shae and the others remained in and around the car. Someone turned up the volume on Beyoncé's Renaissance album, a work celebrated for its homage to Black queer culture and ballroom traditions. The album had special significance for O'Shae and his friends. Its tracks honored the very dance forms that had given them community and purpose. The music transformed the mundane gas station into something else entirely. O'Shae, never one to suppress his joy, began to dance. Not just casual movement, but voguing, his body creating sharp angles, his hands framing his face, his movements precise and fluid in alternating measures. This wasn't performance for attention. It was authentic expression, the natural response of a dancer hearing music that spoke directly to his cultural experience. Friends joined in, some recording videos on their phones, others dancing alongside him. The gas station forecourt became an impromptu celebration space. Security camera footage would later capture these moments. O'Shae in motion, alive with joy, his friends surrounding him in a bubble of collective happiness. Across the forecourt, a group of young men took notice. They were teenagers, later described as being of Middle Eastern descent, and their attention quickly turned from curiosity to hostility. They began to approach O'Shae and his friends, their body language increasingly aggressive. "Stop that gay dancing," one of them called out. "We don't do that in this neighborhood." The words cut through the music, slicing the joy of the moment. O'Shae's friends later recalled the sudden shift in atmosphere, how quickly celebration transformed into tension. The teenagers continued hurling homophobic slurs, their voices growing louder, more insistent. Most people faced with such hostility might have retreated, might have turned down the music, stopped dancing, and tried to de-escalate by disappearing into themselves. But that wasn't O'Shae Sibley. Throughout his life, dance had been both his joy and his armor. He had learned long ago in Philadelphia that shrinking himself didn't stop the teasing. It only confirmed for others that he deserved it. O'Shae stepped forward. "There's nothing wrong with what we're doing," he said. "We have every right to be here, to be ourselves." The confrontation escalated quickly. The teenagers moved closer, their slurs becoming more pointed, more personal. O'Shae stood his ground, defending not just himself, but the right of his friends to exist in public space without harassment. Witnesses would later describe how he remained composed even as tensions rose, articulate in the face of hatred. "What are you going to do about it?" one of the teenagers challenged. The gas station security cameras captured the scene in silent, grainy footage. O'Shae and his friends on one side, the group of teenagers on the other, the space between them charged with dangerous potential. Other customers at the gas station began to notice the confrontation, some moving away from the growing tension, others watching with concern. For a brief moment, it seemed the situation might dissipate. The groups separated slightly, the teenagers appearing to back off. O'Shae and his friends returned to their vehicle, perhaps believing the worst had passed. In that moment of false calm, no one could have predicted how quickly and irrevocably everything was about to change. The momentary calm at the mobile gas station was deceptive. Though the groups had physically separated, the tension remained electric in the night air. The teenagers, having briefly retreated, continued to mutter comments just loud enough for O'Shae and his friends to hear. Each slur was a deliberate provocation, designed to wound and incite. "We don't want that gay shit here," one of them called out. "This is our neighborhood." These weren't just words. They were assertions of ownership over public space, declarations about who belonged and who didn't. For O'Shae Sibley, who had spent his life carving out places where he could exist authentically, such claims were impossible to ignore. O'Shae turned back toward the group. His friends later recalled trying to pull him away, urging him to let it go. "It's not worth it," one friend said, placing a hand on O'Shae's shoulder. But O'Shae gently removed the hand. "No," he said firmly. "I'm tired of this. We have every right to be here." He approached the teenagers again, his stance confident but not aggressive. Witnesses described how he spoke with remarkable composure, explaining that he and his friends were simply celebrating, harming no one. He challenged the teenagers' assumptions, asking why their dancing threatened them so much. "Is it because you're afraid of what you don't understand?" O'Shae asked. "Or because you see something in us that you recognize in yourselves?" The question hung in the air, pointed and perceptive. For a moment, it seemed to catch the teenagers off guard. But discomfort quickly hardened back into hostility. The group's apparent leader, a 17-year-old, stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and O'Shae. "You need to get out of here before something happens," he threatened, his voice low but clear in the night air. O'Shae didn't back down. "We're not going anywhere," he replied. "We have as much right to be here as you do." The confrontation intensified, voices rising. Other customers at the gas station began recording on their phones, sensing the dangerous trajectory of the interaction. The teenager's body language grew more aggressive, shoulders squared, hands gesturing emphatically, stepping closer to O'Shae and his friends. Then, unexpectedly, the tension seemed to break. A gas station employee emerged, telling both groups they needed to leave if they weren't buying anything. The teenagers backed away, appearing to head toward the street. O'Shae and his friends returned to their car, believing the confrontation had ended. For approximately 2 minutes, a fragile peace held. O'Shae leaned against the car, speaking quietly with his friends, likely processing what had just happened. The music had been turned down. The dancing stopped. The normal rhythms of the gas station resumed. Cars pulling in and out, customers paying at the pump. The mundane business of everyday life continuing. This brief de-escalation created a false sense of security. O'Shae and his friends began to relax, perhaps discussing whether to continue their evening elsewhere, unaware that the teenagers hadn't actually left the vicinity. Instead, they had regrouped just beyond the gas station property, their anger festering rather than dissipating. Surveillance footage would later show the 17-year-old speaking intensely with his friends, gesturing back toward the gas station. Whatever was said in those moments hardened into resolve. The group began moving back toward O'Shae and his friends, their approach deliberate, purposeful. O'Shae noticed them returning and straightened up from the car. His friends later described how he positioned himself slightly in front of them, a protective stance, instinctive and telling. Even in that moment of renewed danger, his first thought was for the safety of others. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have stood your ground like O'Shae, defending your right to exist freely in public space? Or would you have walked away, prioritizing safety over principle? As the teenagers sat down, they wanted to ask me to irreversible violence. The teenagers returned to the gas station with renewed hostility, their brief retreat having only concentrated their anger. As they approached O'Shae and his friends for the second time, the atmosphere shifted from tense to dangerous. Witnesses described how the confrontation reignited almost instantly, voices raised and bodies positioned for conflict. "You still here?" one of the teenagers called out. "We told you to leave." O'Shae stood his ground, continuing to defend himself and his friends verbally. But this time, the exchange escalated more rapidly. The 17-year-old moved closer to O'Shae, entering his personal space in a clear act of intimidation. Security footage captured the moment. Two figures face to face, one refusing to be diminished, the other refusing to allow his authority to be challenged. What happened next occurred with devastating speed. As words continued to fly between them, the teenager suddenly produced a knife. There was no prolonged struggle, no obvious warning, just a swift, brutal motion. The blade entered O'Shae's chest, piercing his heart in a single lethal thrust. O'Shae staggered backward, his expression shifting from defiance to shock. For a moment, he remained standing, perhaps not fully comprehending what had happened. Then he collapsed onto the concrete of the gas station forecourt, blood beginning to spread across his shirt. The teenagers fled immediately, running from a scene and disappearing into the Brooklyn night. Their exit was as quick as their attack. A group of young men, there one moment, gone the next, leaving chaos in their wake. O'Shae's friends rushed to his side, the reality of what had happened dawning on them with horrifying clarity. Otis Pena, O'Shae's friend of 15 years, dropped to his knees beside him. With trembling hands, Pena applied pressure to the wound, desperately trying to stem the flow of blood that pulsed between his fingers. "Stay with me," Pena pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please stay with me." Other friends called 911, their voices frantic as they reported the stabbing and begged for an ambulance. Bystanders gathered, some offering help, others recording the aftermath on their phones. The gas station moments before, just another corner of Brooklyn, had transformed into a scene of tragedy. Blood continued to pour from O'Shae's wound despite Pena's efforts. The knife had struck with terrible precision, damaging O'Shae's heart beyond what pressure alone could remedy. As the minutes passed, O'Shae's responses grew weaker. The vibrant energy that had defined him throughout his life visibly ebbed away on the cold concrete. Police arrived at 11:15 p.m., finding O'Shae bleeding heavily on the sidewalk with his distraught friends surrounding him. Officers immediately took over emergency care, continuing the desperate attempts to keep O'Shae alive until medical professionals could arrive. When the ambulance reached the scene minutes later, paramedics worked quickly to stabilize O'Shae enough for transport. They loaded him into the ambulance, sirens blaring as they rushed toward Maimonides Memorial Hospital. Pena and another friend followed in their car, praying that the doctors could save the life that meant so much to so many. At the hospital, medical staff fought to save O'Shae, but the damage was too severe. The knife had struck his heart directly, causing catastrophic blood loss and damage to the organ itself. Despite the doctor's best efforts, O'Shae Sibley was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. In the sterile hallway of Maimonides Memorial Hospital, Pena received the news that his friend of 15 years was gone. The dancer whose movements had inspired so many would never move again. The man who had stood up against hatred had paid the ultimate price for his courage. A life of extraordinary promise had been extinguished in seconds, transformed from a biography still being written into a statistic. Another black gay man killed for the simple act of existing authentically in public space.
Here's Antonia Hilton.
O'Shae Sibley was living out his dreams in New York City as a talented dancer working with Alvin Ailey and performing in the underground voguing scene. Now, friends are struggling to make sense of a sudden loss.
It seemed very surreal. I'm still kind of in disbelief.
Witnesses say late Saturday night, the 28-year-old was dancing to Beyoncé music with friends outside of this gas station in Brooklyn when a group of men approached, shouting anti-LGBTQ slurs, demanding they stop dancing. It escalated. Then police say a man pulled out a knife and stabbed him. Sibley's close friend, Otis Pena, was there. He posted this video to Facebook, describing the horrific scene.
I had to run to him and hold his wound as blood is dripping on my hands, as blood is on my clothes.
Police say they are now searching for a 17-year-old suspect and investigating the incident as a possible hate crime. For months now, LGBTQ people have been warning of an increase in threats and attacks. There have been more than 350 incidents of anti-LGBTQ harassment, vandalism, and assault since June of 2022.
Do you think some queer New Yorkers are going to start pulling back bits of who they are or not expressing themselves fully now?
I think that's one of my biggest fears, is that we'll see people closeting themselves. Like, we've done so much work to be out loud and proud and be who we are.
O'Shea's close friend and fellow
The
choreographer.
investigation into O'Shae Sibley's murder began immediately. NYPD officers secured the mobile gas station, transforming the site from a crime scene to an evidence collection zone. Yellow tape cordoned off the area where O'Shae had fallen, blood still staining the concrete, a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred just hours before. Detectives from the NYPD's Homicide Division took charge of the case, recognizing its potential classification as a hate crime based on witness statements about the homophobic language used during the confrontation. Their first crucial lead came from the gas station's security system, which had captured the entire incident from multiple angles. The footage provided investigators with clear images of the suspect, a 17-year-old with dark hair, wearing a black shirt and red shorts at the time of the attack. Though grainy in parts, the video documented the confrontation's progression, from the initial exchange to the brief de-escalation, and finally to the fatal stabbing. Most importantly, it clearly showed the teenager's face. Detectives also collected statements from witnesses, including O'Shea's friends and other customers present during the attack. These accounts consistently described the homophobic nature of the confrontation, with multiple witnesses confirming that both the suspect and those with him had directed anti-gay slurs at O'Shae and his friends before the violence erupted. Physical evidence collected at the scene included blood samples and fingerprints from various surfaces. However, the murder weapon, the knife used in the stabbing, was not recovered, suggesting the suspect had taken it when fleeing the scene. As investigators built their case, The story of O'Shae's murder spread rapidly through media coverage and social media. The security footage, released to the public in an effort to identify the suspect, was viewed millions of times. The clear hate-motivated nature of the crime generated widespread outrage and calls for justice. The pressure mounted quickly. On August 4, 2023, less than a week after the murder, the 17-year-old suspect turned himself in to the NYPD. He arrived at the police station accompanied by his attorney, surrendering to authorities without incident. Though a minor, the severity of the crime meant he would face charges as an adult under New York law. Prosecutors from the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office moved swiftly, charging the teenager with second-degree murder as a hate crime, a charge that carried a potential sentence of 20 to 25 years in prison if convicted. Additionally, he faced charges of criminal possession of a weapon, acknowledging the premeditated nature of bringing a knife to the confrontation. At his arraignment in Brooklyn Criminal Court, the suspect pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense attorney requested reasonable bail, arguing that his client had no prior criminal record and had voluntarily surrendered to police. However, given the severity of the charges and the hate crime classification, the judge ordered him held without bail pending trial. The NYPD officially classified the case as a hate crime investigation, with department spokespeople citing the clear evidence that O'Shae had been targeted specifically because of his sexual orientation. This classification brought additional resources to the prosecution and highlighted the broader social implications of the case. As the legal process began its slow progression toward trial, the stark reality remained. A 17-year-old faced decades in prison, and a vibrant 28-year-old dancer was gone forever, all because of a chance encounter fueled by hatred and intolerance. News of O'Shae Sibley's murder reverberated far beyond the Brooklyn Street corner, where his life ended. As details of the hate-motivated killing spread, grief transformed into collective action. Communities across New York City and beyond mobilized to honor his memory and demand justice. New York City Mayor Eric Adams addressed the killing directly, his voice firm as he condemned the attack. This was clearly a hate crime, Adams stated during a press conference at City Hall. The mayor, a former police officer himself, pledged that the city would pursue justice for O'Shae and his loved ones. His unequivocal labeling of the murder as hate-motivated set the tone for the official response, signaling to both the LGBTQ+ community and the broader public that the city recognized the deeper implications of the violence. The response extended far beyond political circles. Beyoncé, whose music had been playing during O'Shae's final moments of joy, posted a simple but powerful tribute on her website. Rest in power, O'Shae Sibley. The message, displayed prominently on her homepage, directed her massive global audience toward O'Shae's story. For many of her fans, this was their introduction to the tragedy, expanding awareness of the case exponentially. On August 3, 2023, 5 days after the murder, approximately 80 mourners gathered at the historic Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village. The location was significant, as the site of the 1969 uprising that helped launch the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement. Stonewall has long served as a gathering place in moments of community crisis. Attendees held candles, shared memories of O'Shae, and recommitted themselves to fighting the hatred that had claimed his life. The following day, hundreds more assembled at the mobile gas station where O'Shae was killed. The forecourt that had been the site of violence was reclaimed as a space of community healing. Friends spoke of O'Shae's kindness, his talent, his unwavering authenticity. Strangers who had never met him but recognized in his story the dangers they themselves faced came to stand in solidarity. Most powerfully, the gathering transformed into an act of resistance through art, the very medium that had defined O'Shae's life. Under the banner Vogue as an act of resistance, dancers from across the city performed on the same concrete where O'Shae had danced his last. Their bodies moved in the angular, precise motions of voguing, each gesture a defiant statement. We will not hide, we will not shrink, we will not stop expressing ourselves. As the dancers moved, the crowd grew. What began as a memorial evolved into a celebration of resilience. Passing cars honked in support. Neighbors emerged from nearby buildings to witness the gathering. The gas station for those hours became sacred ground, a place where community power visibly overcame hatred. Similar vigils and dance gatherings spread to other cities, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Chicago, as O'Shae's story touched communities nationwide. In each location, the message was the same. Dancing is not a crime, existing authentically is not a provocation, and the response to hatred must be more visibility, not less. In Philadelphia, O'Shae's hometown, about 200 people gathered at a historic opera house for his funeral. The service blended grief with celebration of his life and legacy. Karen Pendergrass, the dance teacher who had first welcomed him into her classroom, announced the establishment of a dance scholarship in his name, ensuring that future generations of young dancers would find the same refuge and movement that had transformed O'Shae's life. Through these collective responses, communities transformed individual grief into shared purpose, honoring O'Shea not just through mourning, but through action, art, and a renewed commitment to creating a world where no one dies for dancing. The dangers faced by Black LGBTQ+ individuals remain acute in contemporary America. Statistics consistently show that they experience disproportionate rates of violence, with Black transgender women facing particularly high risks. These aren't abstract numbers, but reflect a reality where existing at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities can be life-threatening. What makes O'Shae's story particularly powerful is how he used art as his form of resistance. Dance wasn't just his profession or hobby. It was his language, his politics, his way of moving through a world that often tried to constrain him. From his early days at Philadanco to his final moments at the gas station, movement was how O'Shea claimed space and affirmed his right to exist fully. This understanding transforms how we view what happened that night. O'Shea wasn't killed for dancing. He was killed for refusing to be invisible. He was killed for asserting that public spaces belong to everyone, not just those who conform to dominant expectations. He was killed for embodying the radical proposition that joy is a right, not a privilege granted only to some. The teenagers who confronted O'Shea that night encountered something they didn't understand and responded with violence, a pattern repeated throughout history when marginalized communities demand recognition. But in death, O'Shae's message has reached far more people than it might have in life. His final act of resistance, dancing freely, defending that right, refusing to shrink himself, has become a powerful symbol for ongoing struggles for equality and freedom of expression. Through this lens, we see that O'Shae's story isn't just about one night of violence, but about the ongoing battle for who gets to exist freely in America, and how art can be both expression and resistance in that struggle. In the wake of O'Shae Sibley's death, his legacy continues to grow in ways both formal and organic. The dance scholarship established in his name at the Philadelphia School of Dance Arts ensures that future generations of young dancers, particularly those who, like O'Shea, might be searching for a place to belong, will have the opportunity to discover themselves through movement. Each scholarship recipient carries forward a piece of a story, transforming tragedy into opportunity. Beyond institutional memorials, O'Shae's impact resonates through the countless individuals who learned of his life and death and found in it a call to action. Dance studios across the country have hosted events in his honor, combining performance with education about the intersection of art and activism. His name has become shorthand for the ongoing struggle for safe public expression, particularly for those with marginalized identities. The prevention of similar tragedies requires multi-layered approaches, strengthening hate crime laws and their enforcement, expanding education about LGBTQ+ identities and histories, creating more safe spaces for expression, and empowering bystanders to intervene when they witness harassment. Each of these represents a step toward a world where no one dies for dancing. O'Shae's final moments, dancing joyfully, standing up against hatred, refusing to diminish himself, embody both the beauty and danger of authentic existence in America. His life was cut short, but the ripples of his courage continue to spread, challenging us all to examine how we create and maintain public spaces where everyone can exist freely. O'Shae's story reminds us how art can be both expression and resistance. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others learn about O'Shae's legacy.